So, welcome everybody to the last week of this course. Who has been here every week so far? Okay, pretty good. I'm impressed you all made it out tonight. You know, we come here for inner peace and total, complete and utter liberation from all suffering, but not when it's raining. You want to get enlightened when it's sunny, at least, you know. So, as Susie had mentioned, this is my last evening in Sydney. That's where I am now. And I would really love to stay in Sydney longer, but it's too cold. I've had an interesting experience being here. Some of the quirky things that you do in Sydney. For example, you serve sandwiches on chopping boards. I don't get. They brought me my sandwich. I'm like, have you not finished making it yet?
Did you say that?
I did. This is new on me. Like, I'm a little old-fashioned. I like my sandwich on a plate where it catches the crumbs. You know. And I was thinking, it must be terrible to wash these washing boards, right? I mean, they must take hours to dry. And then you get your coffee in glasses. I want my whiskey in a glass. I want my coffee in a coffee cup with a handle. And they serve you these coffees in little glasses, which I found very interesting. What else? All your traffic lights. I've had to. This is where I've been practicing my patience. Every time you cross the road, there's always, you have to wait for this little green man to tell you it's okay to cross the road. And I've done a lot of meditation walking around Sydney, standing waiting for this little green man to tell me I can cross the road. The only time I nearly got ran over was when I was looking around to see if there's a little green man somewhere, and then I nearly got mowed down by a car. So this is the last week of this series on mindfulness, and the quality of mindfulness is not hugely complicated. It's something that's very simple and very clear and very present in your experience. So really every time we do talks about mindfulness, we're just kind of pointing back to the same thing. And after a while you realize it's the same talk over and over. And then a while after that you realize it's the same talk over and over, but I still haven't found it inside. Now the mind works like a machine. That is, whatever the saying goes, whatever you think and ponder on often, towards that there is a leaning in the mind. This is a saying of the Buddha. To what a man thinks and ponders often, there is a leaning in his mind. I saw a little poem in Mother Teresa's monastery. I met Mother Teresa once. Actually, she put her hand on my head. So, I'm sure that's why I'm nearly enlightened. You know, I thought it would be better than it was, actually. It was just kind of like, what was that? And in her monastery, they had a little poem on the wall that's quite well known. You may know it. Sow a thought, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny. So this poem is saying the exact same thing, that sowing a thought starts to become a habit, and your habits create your character, and your character is your destiny. So we need to be very careful with the things that we put into our mind. And this means that the mind works as a machine, and if you think about something very often, that thought is more likely to come back to you again in the future. Straightforward psychodynamics, right? So we've all agreed in the first few weeks, when I talked about spiritual qualities and unwholesome qualities, we can all agree on what good qualities are. Compassion and kindness and patience and generosity, we all agree that these are good qualities. But unless you think and ponder on them often, they're less likely to come up in the mind. And if we do think and ponder on something often, it arises very easily in the mind. And this is why we practice things like the loving kindness meditation, or I very much like appreciation and generosity. And I call these up into my mind and I make myself try to feel appreciative. The more often I do that, the easier it is for me to feel appreciation. Appreciation for what? Appreciation for a healthy body, safe society. Thailand right now is affected by these droughts. I don't know which is worse, the droughts or the military government. But we're afflicted by both. So, appreciation for all of these many good things. And most of us have pretty good lives. You think back to your parents and your grandparents, people going off to the Vietnam War and World War II and things like this. I mean, those are really difficult times. We have it easy. Appreciation to whom? To me, it's just to the universe. The universe has looked after me very well and I'm appreciative. So the more often that you call a particular quality into your mind, the easier it is for that quality to arise again in the future. So if you're thinking angry thought, you're making it more easy for anger to arise in your mind in the future. So some years ago they had this Freudian based psychology, and they had things like stream pushings, where you think of all your anger and your hatred towards your, I don't know, what are you angry towards? Your government, your husband, I don't know. And then you scream it into a cushion and maybe you beat it a little bit and then you feel better. But what you're doing is you're increasing the tendency for that emotion to arise in the mind. It's a very straightforward process. So we need to be careful with the qualities that we allow or that we entertain into the mind. The mind will naturally feel different thoughts and emotions, but if you feed them with more thinking, then you're increasing the tendency for that thought. Then you sow a habit, you get a character, you get a destiny. So of all these qualities that we have the choice of arousing and practicing and maintaining, one of those qualities is this quality of mindfulness, and it may be a little difficult to nail down originally, and that's really only because we don't generally talk about this quality, mindfulness, awareness. We kind of assume it's there. But by continually talking about it and finding Dhamma talks and Dhamma teachers and things that continually talk about it, we're increasing the tendency for this quality to appear in the mind. And this quality is our path for change. So I saw this cartoon a while back, and it had I may have told you, had a crowd of people, and this guy was standing at the front saying, who wants change? And everyone raises their hands and saying, we do. And then he says, who wants to change? And everyone totally quiet. We kind of know that we want things to be different, but we want everybody else to be different. You know? If everybody else was a little more peaceful and a little bit more loving, then I would have a better life, right? And so this idea or tendency to want other people and want other things to change is very innate in our tendency. For me, walking around Sydney is different to walking around Thailand. In Thailand, people, everybody kind of nudges and like, look, here is a foreign monk, here's a white monk. And if I think about it, it can start to get me really annoyed. Little kids kind of tugging on their mother's skirt. Look, look, a white monk, a white monk. And, you know, when I was a kid, if I saw a black vicar, I wouldn't shout, oh, black vicar, black vicar. But walking around Sydney, people leave me alone, but every so often someone comes up and asks me if I'm a Hare Krishna. So this morning I was in Leichhardt and this woman said, are you a Hare Krishna? I said, no, are you? So this quality of, you know, if I allow that kind of getting annoyed or getting frustrated to arise in my mind, I'm making it more likely for me to feel frustrated in the future. So this is why we emphasize taking care of your mind. It's very, very important. And the tool for taking care is this quality of awareness. If you can see yourself doing these things, if you can be aware of yourself in your interaction with the world, then it naturally starts to change. If you're angry at something and you are not mindful, you just think of that thing that you're angry at. Right? This guy the other day, I was walking along from Ashfield, and he shouts down from his balcony, he shouts, come in, come down in my driveway. I'm like, why? And then he said, I'm not kidding, he said, have you got any literature? No. And I felt a bit annoyed because I don't want people shouting at me on the street. I want you to leave me alone. Unless you have some ice cream for me or something, you know. If you've got something good for me, you can do it. And then as I walked on, I had this feeling of frustration. And oh God, people leave me alone. And this is this feeling of frustration. Now if I feed that with more thinking, what's going to happen? More likely for me to feel this frustration coming up again in the future, right? Straightforward psychodynamics. So if I'm not mindful, I just simply see the man standing up on his balcony, annoying me. But if I'm mindful, I see this feeling arise, and that's interesting, that feeling. Let's see what happens with it. Where does it come from? Where does it go? If I don't feed it, what's going to happen to it? And it just stays there as a tickle for a little while, a little feeling that says, oh, come and think about me and get annoyed. Like I can see it very clearly. I don't want to do that. And then I started thinking of this old man. I thought, you know, he's probably very lonely. He probably just wants somebody to talk to, even a Hare Krishna. He probably just, you know, wants a bit of company for the day, and I've been rather rude to him. And then I kind of went back, and I'm looking up to see if he'd gone by that time. In this way, the mindfulness has changed me. I didn't need to change myself. I don't need to say, I'm going to be a good person, I'm a beautiful person. I don't need to impress anybody. But the mindfulness, the awareness will start to change you quite naturally by itself. if you have that awareness. Now, these kind of rules and laws around the inner life always work in paradox. For example, the more you give away, the more you have. Straight paradox. The more you give up of yourself, the better yourself becomes. Paradox. So everything on the inward journey starts to happen in paradoxes. Do you remember Alice through the looking glass, and she sees a mountain in the distance, and she wants to get onto the hilltop, and every time she heads towards the hilltop, the path gets longer, stretches out ahead of her, and she gets very frustrated. And then so she gives up trying to get to the hill, and then she's on the hill. So Lewis Carroll was talking about all these meditation experiences. If you want, next time I come, we can do a workshop on Alice in Wonderland, and what the meaning is of all the different experiences that she had. So everything goes in this way, and so in Zen they have this koan, which is a statement of enlightenment. And this koan says, a man who sits at the top of a 100-foot pole, how does he proceed? Do you have any answer? Good. You're not supposed to answer. No, you're not supposed to answer. The koans are like a conundrum that you internalize. And only when you see it internally do you understand the meaning. So a man sitting at the top of a 100-foot pole, it doesn't sound very enticing, right? It doesn't sound like that's a place where you want to be. But internally, in the meditation, that's exactly where you want to be. Everything goes in this paradox. So as we start to apply the mindfulness to the inner world, things start to change. The outer world, the objective world, is made from atoms and physical form. And we are accustomed in this day and age to understanding the world as physical form. Anything that's consciousness is just like a side effect. Sometimes it's called the functionalist view of philosophy. That consciousness, or our internal life, is just some kind of function of material matter. But sometimes there are things that we know about or we experience regularly that get overlooked by our viewpoint. Our viewpoints, as I was stressing over the weeks that have passed, our viewpoints are stories, and our stories that are what make up the world. We understand the world through stories, or I like to say we story the world. One of the viewpoints that I like is called the electric universe theory. And if you give me half a chance, I will nobble you for hours on end and tell you all kinds of details about it. One of the things that this particular theory talks about is they say that lightning does not come from the clouds to the earth. Lightning goes between the earth and space. So the lightning has to go up from the clouds as well as down from the clouds to earth. And this theory was put forward about 35, 40 years ago. And science, our common paradigm, says, no, clouds rub electrons off themselves while they're up in the air, and then it short circuits with the earth. So lightning goes from clouds to earth. This other theory says, yes, but it also goes from the clouds up to space. And despite this theory has been there and predicted this for a long time, it's always been dismissed by science. Interestingly, pilots around the world have been reporting this lightning that goes up to space, and it appears as like a blue mushroom kind of lightning. It's not jagged fork lightning. Pilots have been reporting this for as long as they've been flying above the clouds, and it just gets overlooked, it gets dismissed. About 10 years ago, they finally caught one of these on video, now that we all have video cameras on our phone. And so now it's become an accepted phenomenon that actually lightning goes upwards. Look it up, blue sprites. My point of bringing this story up is that very often there are things that are regularly seen by many, many people, but just get dismissed because they're not talked about or they don't fit into your story. That's in the physical world. So in the internal world of consciousness, for the external world, form is real, and we can see it and we can measure it, and that's certainly a very successful way of looking at the universe. It gives us our medicine, it gives us our aeroplanes, it gives us our smartphones, and all the necessities of life. But to the meditator, what's real is consciousness. That's what's actually real, that's what we can find. We can't find physical form, we can't really say what physical form is. We can only say that we have consciousness of it. So our internal world, when we turn the attention backwards, is a very different way of approaching the world around us. What are the rules and laws of this internal universe? I'm reading this book right now called Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home. And this is by Rupert Sheldrake. Do you know Rupert Sheldrake? A few people? Okay. I like Sheldrake. He's a very, very well qualified scientist. And personally speaking, I like good science. I don't like pseudoscience. I like clinically tested medicines. I don't like Chinese herbs and things. I don't like people sticking needles in you and all kinds of alternative therapies and things. I like science that's been tested and proven. He's a very good scientist, very well qualified biologist. But he tends to research things that are a little bit more out on the fringes of science. So he's doing experiments. For example, people with pets have reported for hundreds of years that their pets know when the owners are coming home. And sometimes somebody is at home and somebody sees the dog suddenly jump up at the window, and then she goes, "Oh, my husband's coming home," and starts to make the dinner, and relying on the dog to give that signal. How is that possible in a form-only world, in a matter-only world? How is it possible? Well, maybe the person comes home at a regular time every week. Maybe there's a sound of the car. So what they did was they had people have a camera on the pet in the house, and then they would send a message to the person at random times, "Okay, go home now." And they would also send the person home sometimes by bicycle, sometimes by walking, sometimes by taxi. So you can rule out things like routine, or does the dog hear the car, and things like that. And it turns out there's quite a lot of evidence that actually cats and dogs do know when their owners are coming home. Do you believe that? Have you experienced that? Some people have experienced that. Cats and dogs, but more dogs than cats. And the theory is that cats are just as good as dogs, they just don't care. Same for animals that know when earthquakes are going to happen. And this has been reported for a very long time, that animals start to go really crazy and weird when earthquakes happen. And Sheldrake's asking this question. He says, well, all these billions of dollars we pour into seismic equipment to measure tremors in the earth, maybe if we invested a small portion of that into watching the animals, we might get a better prediction of when earthquakes are going to happen. And he cites some experiments in China where they've done this. And there was one instance in the 70s where the Chinese had asked people to report the behavior of their animals, and they did, and they figured out there's an earthquake coming, and they shipped everybody who would believe them out of the city, and then it was shaken by a heavy earthquake. These days it should be quite easy to do. You just get on the internet, right, and tell people if your animal starts acting weird, go to this website and report it. Now, obviously your animal is going to act weird from time to time. But if you've got 1 million pet owners in a city in California, or a district in California, you've got 1 million pet owners, and 5,000 of them report every day that their pet is acting a bit weird, but then suddenly on one day, 200,000 people suddenly report that animals are acting weird, you have a very good indicator that there's going to be an earthquake. He cites some experiments that were being done on animals just before earthquakes, and one was studying the mating habits of toads. And they had a bunch of female toads and a bunch of male toads, and they were watching how often they mate. And then suddenly all these male toads are like, they just left. And then they were reporting this in the experiment, no idea, but the next morning there was a giant earthquake. And then a day after that, the male toads came back. So these kind of things have been reported for a very long time. And if we actually were willing to research them properly, Sheldrake argues, we can actually make up proper scientific experiments to start to prove that these things happen and to start to figure out how they happen. So for us as meditators, what is real? Is the world out there real? Is it made up of form and physical matter? Sure, that's one way to look at the universe. That's one way to story the universe, and it's a very successful viewpoint. But for the meditator, we are not looking at the world as being made of atoms. We are looking at the world as being made of experience. And when we get past the stories that we have, what we are left with is an immediate experience. An experience, or consciousness, is what is real. Does that make sense? So what are your experiences? You experience sights, you experience sound, you experience tastes, smells, feelings with the physical body, physical feelings, and you experience thoughts. Now in a typical westernized kind of world, we tend to split the world, divide the world up into mental and physical. But in this Buddhist model, and it's only a model, we're not saying that this is the right way to view the world, it's a way to view the world. The thoughts, or the mind, is also considered to be a sense. Why? Because you can sense your thoughts. If you couldn't sense your thoughts, then how do you know what you were thinking? Right? And especially if you're doing your practice and you're practicing mindfulness and you sit, and then you feel that suddenly a thought comes up. Oh, this is really important, this is really interesting. I found the cure for rap music. And it's just come up, right? If you're looking at it with a story like, well, there's rap music and it's terrible and should be banned and this kind of thing, that's your story. But the actual experience is, oh, that's just come up right now. So what we do is we're trying to train ourselves to be willing to not view the world as being real and out there, to put down the stories and just stop and feel the actual experience. And the actual experience, when you come to it, is very, very temporary. So the Buddha said that it is easy to see that this body is impermanent, will change. 50 years, 100 years, the hair turns grey, the teeth turn yellow, the back goes crooked as a roof rafter. I love that. But hard is it to see that this mind is impermanent. But in fact, this mind springs up as one thing and ceases as another. Just like a monkey that swings through the forest, grabs hold of one branch, lets go, and grabs hold of another branch. So you may have heard, that's a quote near enough without checking my book. You may have heard about the monkey mind, but the monkey mind was not, oh, I have a lot of thinking and my mind's jumping around. The monkey mind is the experience of consciousness for all people. That consciousness picks up one thing, hangs onto it for a few moments, drops it, and is already grabbing onto another thing, and then onto another thing. And this is our experience when you turn the attention inwards. This mind is incredibly unstable. This is seeing impermanence of the mind, which is said to be harder than seeing the impermanence of the body. So this is one of the insights, and we talk about mindfulness meditation as insight meditation, because it starts to change the way that you look at the world. Not that any other way of looking at the world is wrong, but this particular way of looking at the world starts to change your self and the way that you interact with things. So experience jumping up and changing and going down. Did I tell you about when my father banged his thumb? Did I tell you that story? Not yet? I did for some people. Well, he banged his thumb with a hammer while he was at work, and like most men, he's kind of like wants everybody else to know about that his thumb hurts, right? And so he's like, oh, you know, my thumb hurts. Anybody that would look at him, he'd go, oh, my thumb really hurts. Yeah. He gave it a good wallop. I mean, it must have hurt. And then we're driving home in the van that evening, and every so often, he'd be driving along quite happily, and every so often, oh, my thumb really hurt. And I pointed out to him, actually your thumb wasn't hurting the whole time. And he said, yes it was. Because that's the story, right? That's the thumb is made of physical matter, and my story is, this is my thumb and it's been hurting the whole time, right? His story has come up in that instance, and that's how he is relating to his thumb. But I'm watching him, and every couple of seconds after doing this, he's indicating and turning and moving around and overtaking, and forgotten all about his thumb. So what's real? Is it the physical matter of the thumb, the atoms and the flesh and the nail? Is that what's real? Is what's real his story about the world? The story is, my thumb hurts and it's hurt the whole time, and it's going to keep on hurting, and everybody needs to know about it. You know, my mum would like bang her thumb, she just wouldn't tell anyone, you know, but or is what is actually real is he's driving along and that's his experience. Then when his attention turns onto the thumb, then that experience comes up into his conscious mind. Now his unconscious may have been feeling his thumb, we're not interested in that. Okay? Now, the big question is, where does suffering arise? The first noble truth of Buddhism, suffering, right? So where does suffering arise? It only arises with the conscious attention. His thumb doesn't hurt him if he's not paying conscious attention to it, right? Psychologists may disagree with this, and there's some there's a lot we can say about that. For our purposes here, suffering will only arise when you put conscious attention onto it. So, this feeling comes up as a temporary experience, and he reacts to it as a story, as if it's there the whole time. So mindfulness training and practice is trying to get you to start to change this viewpoint and start to see things as arising and ceasing right here and right now. So this arising and ceasing, this is called the arising of the world. And there is in philosophy this question, especially Indian philosophy. Indians are very keen on philosophy, I don't know if you noticed. And they have this idea that the world is illusion, Maya. Have you heard that? The world is illusion. And there's two theories. One is, the world is illusion. It's not really there. It's not really what we think about it. We've just got caught up in some kind of cosmic drama. I think the Hindu word for cosmos actually means drama. And it's a story that's being played out in the God. The other idea is that the universe is delusion. That means everything is really there, but we are deluded about it. So is the universe real? Is it illusion? Is it delusion? According to Buddhism, if you have seen the arising of the world, you cannot say it isn't real. Here's the statement. So what is the arising of the world? The arising of the world is looking at my thumb, creating a story about it. This is my thumb, it's been hurting the whole time, and I need to tell everybody about it. This is a story that arises, that we consider to be fixed in the world. So we treat everything, all of these things, we treat as if they are real objects in the world. You treat your wife as if she's always your wife. You treat your house as if it's always your house. And it's kind of practical, so don't start. But we're starting to change that around. This is called object permanence. And the experiments are with little babies. And if you have a baby and you show a baby a toy, a rattle, and the baby is interested, if you then hide that rattle underneath a piece of cloth so the baby can't see it, the baby has no idea that that thing is actually still there. Because to a baby, they only recognize the actual experience. After a few years, I don't know how long, I'm not really good with children, and after at least a few months, 6 months I would guess, they start to get this idea that just because they can't see, feel, touch or taste something doesn't mean that it isn't there. So they start to get this idea that there are permanent objects around in the world. So at this point, the baby can start going to a drawer and open the drawer because it knows something is in the drawer. And I don't know if you've ever played peekaboo with children, that they love this thing that you hide behind something and then you appear. Why do they like that so much? What's so fascinating about that? And they go on for it hours and hours. You can do it with your cat as well. I used to do it in my kitchen. We had an island unit in the kitchen, and we had a microwave and an oven with a reflective surface, so you can see where the cat is. And I would walk around the island unit, and then the cat would come around to see me. I could zip around, and I could go on for hours, and the cat knew I was there, but would never see me. Great ways to torment cats. Why was the cat so interested that I was there? Why are children so interested in this peekaboo? Well, the children are starting to get that feeling that, oh, that thing is still there even if I'm not experiencing it. And this is called object permanence. And what we do from that point on is we create these permanent objects around in the world. This is me and my thoughts and my house and my property and my pension and my future and my past and my childhood and my psychology. And you create this big array of permanent objects. This is the arising of the world. And the Buddha said, if you've seen the arising of the world, you cannot say it isn't real. But on the next line he says, if you have seen the cessation of the world, then you cannot say it is real. He's very fond of these kind of things, not letting you go one way or another. If you have seen the cessation of the world, you cannot say it is real. So this definition of the world, according to the Buddha, he said, everything that is transitory, everything that is not permanent, which is your eye, forms and eye consciousness, your ear, sounds and hearing consciousness, your tongue, tastes and tasting consciousness, your body, bodily feelings and body consciousness, your thoughts, your mind and mind consciousness. All of these things are transitory. All of these things are, in Buddhism, the world. So the cessation of the world is when all of these things, these permanent objects and this... Do you ever see when they have those people, I don't know if they still do it, spinning plates as a kind of show, and they have these long sticks and they put plates on and they run around spinning it, and we've just paid $50 for a ticket to see that. It's kind of like that. We have these permanent objects in the world, right? These are our stories, and we have to keep running around and tweaking these stories and keeping those plates spinning. What happens if you just let them all drop? Stop tweaking those sticks, let all the plates drop, and let all your stories go, all of these permanent objects that you have in this world that you keep conjuring up in your mind. There's a point where all of it just stops. So with the awareness meditation, in amongst all the different experiences that you can have coming up, there is always this quality of pure awareness. Pure awareness is not the object of consciousness. It's there behind every experience, behind every state. And what happens is, as we practice this quality, and the more often you see, identify and practice the quality, the easier it is for that quality to arise in the mind. So the more often you see and identify this quality of awareness, the easier it is to come up in the mind. But that awareness, because it's there with every single experience that you have, starts to give you a sense of a refuge or an escape. It starts to give you a place in which you can put your attention that isn't just a temporary experience that's arising and ceasing and passing away. And we call this a nitsarana. Nitsarana, it means a refuge or an escape. So this quality of awareness is our refuge. This is a place where we can place the mind independent of all the experiences. So when people come to do meditation, they very often want to get experiences, meditation experiences, at least a few lights or something, at least a nice buzzing feeling, like coffee or something, they want an experience from the meditation. Bliss, maybe, some peace, maybe if you count your breaths 1 to 10 and suddenly you're in inner peace. What's inner peace? Peace is just an experience that you're just calling up right now, right? It's just arisen 5 seconds ago and it's going to disappear in 5 more seconds. So this quality of awareness, because it's behind every single state of mind, means you give up worrying too much about the content of the mind. Content of the mind changes all the time, it's never stable. But behind the content of the mind is this stable ground, this awareness, this mindfulness. The more that you can stand and rest and take refuge in that stable ground, the more you've changed your perspective of the way that you see and interact with the world. then you will change. Not because somebody's told you should, not because somebody's written out a formula and this is how a human being should be, but you change quite naturally just from the process of observation. So now you get the question, well, if there is this stable ground and you have this practice awareness, from time to time, what you experience is the mind withdraws from all the stuff in the world and just sits still with naked awareness itself. It's called ekabhava, the mind coming together, centered. And this, I would call it coalescing of the mind. I also like the word recollection. I like the word recollection because it has this idea of collecting your faculties. Recollection is another word for mindfulness. So every so often the mind comes together, it just stops. And you're aware, but you're not aware of things. You look around and you can't find yourself. It's interesting. Right? Yourself is just a story that you have to conjure up and start spinning. But if you're accustomed to this refuge, to this mindfulness, sometimes you catch yourself with nothing. No story, no identity, there's no gender there, there's no age there, there's no future, there's no past, there's no parents that mistreated you, there's no government, no military. Does this sound good? As I said, everything happens in paradox. When you empty everything out, suddenly the mind comes together and is completely fulfilled. Everything happens in paradox when you get inward. So this is called the ending of the world. This is the cessation of the world. We get accustomed to this feeling of conjuring the world up into this immense universe and world that we interact with, and all the people that we know, and our thoughts and our habits and education and jobs and children and all the rest of it. If you're mindful, if you're sharp, you catch those moments when it just collapses like a house of cards. In Zen, they say that the views and opinions, which I call stories, is like a creeper. And the creeper will cover over a tree or a house, and eventually the tree or the house or the boat that the creeper has covered will disappear. But the creeper will still be there, the vine or creeper. You see this around in Bangkok on the canals, that very often old boats get dumped and a creeper comes over it, the boat just dissolves and rots away, but it's left with a kind of vague boat shape. This is how Zen considers your view of the world. And the quality of a creeper is it has no internal structure. And if you cut it at the right point, just in the little point where the creeper comes out, the entire structure crashes down. So this is the ending of the world. This is when your stories about the world just stop. And what would you normally do as a human being? Because all of these experiences happen for every single person. What do you do normally is you look around, right? Better feed the cat, I've got to go and do something, you know. If you're not doing something, you don't feel like you're alive. But if you practice this refuge, you feel it and you stop. And you're mindful, you're awake, you're aware, you're just being without being anything. The mind gets recollected. This is the ending of the world. And the Buddha said, if you've seen the ending of the world, you cannot say the world is real. So this is our practice. This is what monks do. I'm a professional world ender. You know, I was in hospital this one time and I had my 4 wisdom teeth out. And it's quite a big job. And I told when I went in, I told them, I said, now, I'm going to be unconscious when this happens. And they said, oh, you wuss, you know, we don't do that now. And then they looked in my mouth, they said, oh, you're a bit of a tough one, I think we'll give you a full anaesthetic. And I always forget to tell the doctors that when I have an anesthetic, I always stay asleep for 5 times longer than they intend me to. If they put me under for half an hour, I'll be under for 3 hours. If they put me under for 1 hour, I'll be under for 5 hours. My theory is that while I'm under and gone on the anesthetic, my theory is that I like it, and I just don't want to come back. That's my thing. I always forget to tell them, because it's not often I've had operations. I had all my teeth out with gas. In those days they used to gas you to sleep as little kids. So they said, I looked in my mouth and said, okay, you have to go to sleep. Now, it's interesting being mindful in a hospital because you start to really notice things around you. One thing that I noticed that was interesting was the nurses have this secret code. And one of their problems for nurses is when people have died and they want to get the body out and cause as little fuss as possible. So they have a secret code because often the nurses can't tell, are you in a coma, are you under anaesthetic, or have you died? And do you know what they do? At least this is what they do in England. While you're lying there, they put your arms like this across your chest. And then they know and they see, like, oh, okay, they don't get alarmed, and then they move the body out quietly without disturbing people. Anyway, things that you notice when you're mindful in a hospital. So there it was, I had my wisdom teeth out, and I really love being in hospital. After the operation. Before the operation, I'm just like, I go white. And my fear of hospitals, I only have to hear the word hospital and I start to shake. But after an operation, I'm really happy, because all you have to do is just sit there and be, there's nothing to do. People bring you food, and people ask you how you are, and it's okay to say, it sucks, it's terrible. In normal life, people think you're a whinging pom or something, but, in hospital, it's, how are you? It hurts. And they have to give you sympathy. It's great. I love it. So there I was in hospital, and looking around, it's nice and cool, and everybody's gone, and people brought me grapes, and then, bring me my grapes and then leave me alone. And it's nice and cool and quiet, and just a few nurses and other people in the ward around. I think this is wonderful. So I think, I know, I'm going to settle down for some meditation. And these 2 nurses come in and they see me there like this. And this nurse goes, oh my God, he was only having his wisdom teeth done. And the other one says, I didn't know he passed away. And I'm there like this, and then slowly the voice filters through into my consciousness. I'm like, you talking about me? This nurse shot up in the wall in fear. I just suddenly jumped back to life in front of her. But I was quite happy. Just stop and see the ending of the world. This, to a meditator, is a refuge. It might not seem like very much, but everything is by paradox. So when the world stops, everything comes back together and you're home. So this is the meaning of the monk who sits at the top of a 100-foot pole. How does he proceed? He has nowhere left to go. And because he has nowhere left to go, he's complete. So the monk sitting at the top of a 100-foot pole in Zen is a symbol of enlightenment. Clear? Clear as mud.